Over the last several years, I've been buying tons of shares of the DIVO ETF, most of the time even on a consistent weekly basis. Now by doing so, I've been able to amass around 2,000 shares of DIVO across my multiple portfolios. And of course, just for some transparency, here's a few screenshots from some DIVO and some of my larger portfolios. Now in this video, we're going to go over what the DIVO ETF actually even is, how it works, and why I've personally been buying so many shares of it over the past few years. Then towards the end of the video, I'm going to show you exactly every single dividend that my shares of DIVO have paid me since I started buying into this ETF. Now, if you're interested in DIVO, dividend income, or anything of the sorts, make sure to stick around, drop a like down below, and let's get right into it. So heading over to the abbvie ETF's website, looking a little bit deeper into what the DIVO ETF actually is, or the abbvie CWP Enhanced Dividend Income ETF. Now it first says, why invest in DIVO? Very good question. Then it says income potential, comprised of high quality dividend oriented stocks along with covered calls on individual stocks. So when I came across DIVO years back, that was enough to pretty much get me sucked in and get me to start buying this ETF. For the simple reasons that I'm very interested in buying into high quality dividend paying stocks, and for the fact that I'm super interested in selling covered calls, and the fact that I've actually been selling covered calls on a large portion of my portfolio over the several years I've been investing. That alone was enough to get my attention when it comes to DIVO, but let's keep reading on. It then says active management allows the portfolio manager to identify opportunities and risks and act on those decisions in real time. So DIVO is not going to be an ETF that you're necessarily going to have a manager sort of set it and forget it. DIVO is going to be actively managed, which is why unfortunately DIVO does have an expense ratio of around 0.55%, which isn't the cheapest expense ratio, but you have to understand that this ETF is actively managed, so it kind of comes along with the territory. Now DIVO's net assets are just around 3 billion, which is pretty decent, and the number of holdings, which we're going to go through here in a second, are pretty small but effective, right now sitting at around 23 different holdings. So now looking a little bit deeper into DIVO's performance, if we go on the max time frame and look all the way back since around 2017, DIVO as far as ETF price is up around 40.85%. Now hear me out, DIVO is not necessarily going to be an ETF that's going to skyrocket in ETF price. And that's of course obviously because the covered call overlay is going to sort of stop any massive upside potential. But even with the covered call overlay and the fact that DIVO is relatively very low beta, a 40% increase in ETF price on the max time frame is honestly not even that bad. Now another side note here, another reason why I've been buying DIVO so heavily over the years is because the fact that DIVO pays a very consistent dividend on a monthly basis, which I'm going to show you here in a second, but also if you look at DIVO's ETF price, this ETF doesn't move around all that much. On super red days, the ETF doesn't move as far down as some other names, and on super green days, the same. Now for me personally, being an investor that's sort of in capital preservation mode, at least for a portion of my portfolio, this works out perfectly in the regards of that I'm sort of earning my dividend on a monthly basis, but then sort of staying out of the way. Now before we go through DIVO's dividend, looking at the holding breakdowns as of right now, the top 10 holdings are things like government bonds. Then we have really high quality single companies. Things like United Health Group, Microsoft, Visa, Apple, Procter & Gamble, JP Morgan, McDonald's, the Goldman Sachs, Chevron, and a few others. Now, as you look through this list of single stocks for the most part, you can probably agree with me that these are mostly all blue chip names that you or I would not mind having exposure to and or stocks in our portfolio, which is once again one of the main reasons on why I've been buying so many shares of DIVO and why DIVO is honestly a major anchor position in my portfolio, because it's low beta, because it's consistent, and because for the most part, every single stock are single names I either do own or would not mind owning a bit. Now looking a little bit deeper into DIVO's dividend. The dividend yield trailing 12 months is around 4.85%, which isn't the highest, not the lowest. And honestly, before rates skyrocketed and before money market accounts were paying around 5%, back in the old days a few years back, DIVO was around 4 or 5%. Dividend yield seemed a lot bigger. And I get it, right now you can invest in government bonds or you could honestly even have your money in like a money market account and make the same amount of dividends. And for the fact that DIVO doesn't have all that much upside potential as far as ETF price, I fully understand the argument there. I hear you loud and clear. But that being said, DIVO does pay a consistent dividend on a monthly basis, with even some massive special dividends here and there. Now, once again, for more income-focused, sort of boring, risk-averse investors like myself, DIVO is honestly a perfect anchor for your portfolio because it does offer some exposure to some of those blue chip names we went over a second ago, but also DIVO does have some upside and a monthly dividend that you can rely on, at least as far as I can see. Now, I also found this kind of interesting. If you were to chart out DIVO next to the S&P 500 and look at the 3-year time frame, or almost 1100 days, You can see that if we use the metric total return, which are dividends and ETF price included, you can see that the S&P 500 is returned around 32.5% and DIVO's returned just shy of 28%. Now this brings up one of those conversations or arguments, I might even call it, that a lot of investors have against dividend investors. They always say things like, well, if you're going to earn a little bit less or even way less than what you could have earned by investing into the S&P 500, why wouldn't you just buy into the S&P 500? And of course, the simple answer is because the S&P 500 doesn't pay a large dividend. And some of us dividend investors like to use a dividend to help pay bills. Or even for those dividend investors that are retired, that's a whole different story. But one of my big rule of thumbs that I try to stick to for the most part, when choosing to buy into a dividend paying stock or ETF for that matter, if the stock or ETF is massively underperforming the S&P 500 over a certain time frame, say a 3-year time frame or even 5-year time frame, then that might be a good reason to maybe stay away from it. But if an ETF or stock that also pays a higher than normal dividend is performing pretty much in line or at least close to that of the S&P 500, I personally would be willing to shave off a few percentages of return in order to get the cash in my pocket a little bit sooner. Now, the simple answer to all of this is to have a diversified portfolio and have some growth, some income paying assets, and pretty much everything else in between, which is what I have throughout my portfolio. And if you guys have been watching me for a while, you know that by no means am I an investor that buys only into stocks and ETFs that pay high yields. I like to have a little bit of a mix of everything. But for those dividend investors out there that want to have a higher starting yield of around 5%, and of course a monthly paid frequency, the DIVO ETF might be something to look into. Now, when it comes to choosing which ETF an investor wants to buy into, why would an investor even choose to invest into a higher yielding ETF that might not have as much overall growth potential, but is in fact, for example, producing monthly paying dividends? Well, higher yielding ETFs are generally popular for a few of these reasons. For one, income generation. Many investors seek regular income from their investments. And of course, when it comes to generating higher amounts of income in the form of dividends, higher yielding ETFs like DIVO can provide investors with a source of income through the distribution of dividends right off the bat. Now keep in mind, like I said a second ago, when it comes to investing into higher yielding instruments in general, especially way higher yielding ETFs, things like JETB or even Q yield, investors are likely going to see much less capital appreciation, but instead they will see more cash flow, more dividends paid throughout the year. So for the investors out there that are interested in earning higher amounts of dividend income to maybe cover some of their bills, or if the investor is further down the line into their journey and closer to retirement, higher yielding ETFs are most likely going to be much more appealing to them. But it's important to note that for the investors out there that aren't necessarily super hung up on receiving monthly or quarterly distributions in the form of dividends, or even big dividends at that, these type of investors would likely want to choose different ETFs that could offer much higher returns as far as share price appreciation versus getting paid out much more in the form of dividends throughout the year. Now, lastly, I want to share my actual portfolio. This is one of my portfolios with around 1,000 or so shares of DIVO in it. And of course, as time goes back further and further, I had less shares of DIVO. But to give you an idea, back last year in 2022, when I started buying shares of DIVO, these were the dividends that I was paid on a monthly basis. When I first started buying DIVO, I got around 60 cents on my first month, then $4.55, $14.93, $23.98. Then we were up to $35, $48, $73, $84. And then the last few months of last year, we got $105, which honestly I was really excited about. And then come 2023, this year so far, DIVO has paid me anywhere from around $120 on a monthly basis to as much as $161 on a monthly basis. And keep in mind, once again, this is just one of my portfolios. I do own DIVO and I think 3 or 4 different portfolios as of right now. But overall, the DIVO ETF has been pretty good to me. And considering I'm actually green on the cost basis of DIVO, buying into this ETF all in all has been pretty good to me so far. But now I want to hear from you guys down below when it comes to the DIVO ETF. Is DIVO something that you would consider to have as an anchor in your portfolio? Let me know down below in the comments why or why. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to please drop a like and subscribe for more future content like this. Thanks as always for stopping by, and if you are interested in investing, make sure to check out these recent videos I posted right here.